She wasn't born into power. No crown, no wealth, no noble blood. Just an orphan girl, a foreigner, living quietly under the rule of the most powerful empire on earth. Her name was Hadassah, but the world would know her by her Persian name, Esther. She didn't fight her way to the throne. She didn't chase fame or fortune. She was simply chosen not by chance, not by beauty alone, but by divine design. Hidden behind palace walls, Esther was being positioned for something far greater than anyone could imagine. In the days of King Xerxes, ruler of 127 provinces, stretching from India to Ethiopia, his power seemed limitless. From his grand throne in Susa, he ruled with absolute command. To show off his might and wealth, Xerxes threw a massive feast that lasted 6 whole months, 180 days of luxury, with nobles, princes, and military leaders all in attendance. Gold goblets, royal wine, endless food. It was a display of wealth meant to remind the world who ruled it. But when those 6 months ended, the king wasn't done. He opened the palace gates to everyone in Susa and hosted a 7-day banquet in his lavish garden courtyard. Wine flowed freely, and the rule was simple: drink as much as you want. Meanwhile, Queen Vashti, Xerxes' wife, was hosting her own banquet for the women inside the palace. But on the 7th day, when the king was drunk with pride and wine, he sent a command that would change everything. He ordered Vashti to appear before all the guests wearing her royal crown so everyone could admire her beauty. Vashti refused. That one act of queen saying no to her king sent shockwaves through the empire. Xerxes' pride was shattered. His own queen had defied him publicly. Enraged and humiliated, he turned to his advisors. One of them, Memucan, warned him that Vashti's rebellion would spread. All women will hear of this and dishonor their husbands. His advice was simple: remove her, make an example. Send a message that every man must rule his household. And so Vashti was banished. The royal decree went out across all provinces and languages. The queen was gone, and no one could undo the king's command. But behind this act of royal pride and human folly, God's quiet plan had already begun. As time passed, the king's anger faded. He began to miss Vashti, her beauty, her defiance, even her presence. But the law was unchanging. She could never return. So his advisors came up with an idea to distract him and fill the empty throne. Let a search be made for the most beautiful young women across the empire, they said. Gather them into the palace, give them beauty treatments, and let the king choose one to be queen. The idea pleased Xerxes, and the order went out. Messengers spread across 127 provinces, from India to Ethiopia, collecting young women from every corner of the empire. Among them was Esther, a young Jewish girl raised by her cousin Mordecai, who worked at the king's gate. She had no royal blood, no powerful family, but she carried a quiet strength. Mordecai had taught her to fear God and to keep her Jewish identity hidden in this foreign land. When Esther was taken to the palace and placed under the care of Haggai, the keeper of the women, something about her stood out immediately. She didn't demand luxury or attention like the others. Instead, she carried herself with humility and grace. And that quiet humility made her shine brighter than all the jewels in Susa. Haggai noticed. He favored her, giving her the best treatments and a special place in the harem. For 12 months, Esther and the others underwent endless beauty preparations, oils, perfumes, and fine cosmetics, all for a single night before the king. When Esther's time came to meet Xerxes, she asked for nothing extra. No lavish ornaments, no special favors. She entered the king's presence with quiet dignity, her confidence resting not on beauty, but on grace. And when the king saw her, he was captivated. Esther found favor beyond all others. The king placed the royal crown upon her head and declared her queen in place of Vashti. A new queen had risen from the ashes of exile. The palace erupted in celebration, a royal banquet, a holiday across the empire, and gifts sent in her honor. But no one knew the truth that this new queen was Jewish. No one knew that God had just placed his servant in the palace, not to be served, but to save. Even after her coronation, Esther continued to follow Mordecai's guidance, as she always had. Meanwhile, Mordecai remained stationed at the king's gate, a humble place where officials met. Business was done and gossip spread. One day, while sitting at the gate, Mordecai overheard a dangerous secret. Two of the king's guards, Bigthan and Teresh, were whispering in anger. Their voices were low but filled with resentment. They were plotting to assassinate King Xerxes. Mordecai didn't hesitate. He immediately sent word to Esther, who had direct access to the king. She relayed the warning, giving full credit to Mordecai. An investigation followed, and the truth came out. The two guards were found guilty and executed. The king's life was spared, but there was no celebration, no reward. Mordecai's act of loyalty was quietly recorded in the royal chronicles, a small note in a massive book, and then forgotten. Soon after, a man named Haman, an Agagite, was promoted to the highest position among all of Xerxes' officials. Everyone in the kingdom was ordered to bow before him. Everyone except Mordecai. Day after day, Haman noticed the Jew who refused to bow. His anger grew into obsession. And when he learned Mordecai's people were Jews, that anger turned to hate. He didn't just want Mordecai punished. He wanted every Jew in the empire destroyed. Haman cast lots, or Purim, to choose the day. Then he went to the king with a lie coated in half-truths. "There is a certain people scattered across your provinces," he said. "They live differently. They don't obey your laws. It's not in your interest to tolerate them." Without question. The king handed Haman his signet ring, a symbol of absolute authority. Haman wasted no time. He wrote a royal decree on the 13th day of the 12th month. Every Jew, young and old, was to be killed. Couriers raced across all 127 provinces, spreading the order. Panic and confusion gripped the empire. In Jewish homes, mourning broke out. Sackcloth replaced fine clothes. Fasting replaced feasting. The entire nation was paralyzed with grief when Esther heard that Mordecai was mourning in the streets. She sent a messenger to find out why. Through the messenger, Mordecai explained everything: the decree, the danger, the deadline, and urged Esther to go before the king and plead for her people. But Esther hesitated. She knew the law. No one could approach the king unsummoned. The punishment was death unless the king extended his golden scepter. "And I haven't been called in 30 days, she said. It was a risk that could cost her life. Mordecai's reply was unshakable. "Do not think you will escape in the palace. If you remain silent, deliverance will come from somewhere else. But you and your family will perish. And who knows? Perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this." Those words broke through her fear. Esther's reply was resolute. "Go, gather all the Jews in Susa. Fast for me for 3 days. I will go to the king, even if it costs me my life. If I perish, I perish." On the 3rd day, Esther dressed in her royal robes and stepped into the inner court, a place where even queens risked death. The king saw her standing there, radiant and uninvited. Time seemed to stop. Then slowly, Xerxes extended the golden scepter. Esther approached and touched its tip, her heart pounding. The king smiled gently. "What is your request, Queen Esther? Even up to half the kingdom, it shall be granted." Esther bowed slightly and said, "If it pleases the king, come today to a banquet I've prepared you and Haman." Intrigued, the king agreed. Haman's chest swelled with pride. To dine privately with the king and queen, surely he thought this was the honor of honors. But Esther said nothing of her true request. Not yet. She watched. She waited. The time wasn't right. Before the evening ended, she invited them again. "Please come tomorrow, and then I will tell you my request." The king was curious. Haman was thrilled and unaware that his downfall had already begun. That night, sleep escaped the king. The palace was silent. The wine had lost its warmth, and yet something in his spirit felt restless. To distract himself, Xerxes ordered the royal chronicles to be brought in the great book where every event of his reign had been recorded. Servants began to read aloud in the flickering light, recounting victories, decrees, and names long forgotten. Then one particular entry caught his attention, the account of a man named Mordecai, who had uncovered a plot to assassinate the king and saved his life. Xerxes' eyes widened. How could he have forgotten what honor or reward was given to Mordecai? For this, he asked. His servants replied quietly, "Nothing has been done for him." The king frowned. Nothing? A man who had prevented his death had gone unrewarded. As Xerxes pondered this, footsteps echoed down the hall. Haman had arrived early, eager to speak with the king not about loyalty, but revenge. He wanted permission to execute Mordecai on the gallows he had built in his courtyard. But before he could say a word, the king called out, "Haman, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Haman's ego ignited. Surely the king must be speaking about him. In his mind, he pictured himself being praised before all of Susa. For the man the king delights to honor, he said grandly, "Let him be dressed in royal robes the king himself has worn. Let a royal crown be placed on his head, and let him ride the king's own horse through the city. And let one of the king's noble officials lead the horse, proclaiming, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" Xerxes nodded thoughtfully, then smiled. "Excellent. Go at once," he said. "Do everything you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect a single thing." The words hit Haman like a hammer. His face turned pale. His heart pounded in disbelief. But he had no choice. That very morning, he was forced to lead Mordecai through the streets of Susa, declaring the honor he had meant for himself. The people watched in astonishment as the proudest man in Persia paraded his enemy in royal splendor. When it was over, Haman returned home, humiliated, his pride crushed. His wife and friends, once his supporters, warned him gravely, "If Mordecai is of Jewish descent, you will not stand against him. You are doomed." The next day, the second banquet arrived. The king and Haman joined Queen Esther once again, surrounded by the fragrance of wine and the soft glow of lamps. Xerxes leaned toward Esther, his tone affectionate but curious. "Now, Queen Esther," he said, "tell me your request. Even if it is half my kingdom, it shall be granted." The moment Esther had prayed and fasted for had come. She took a deep breath and spoke with calm courage. "If I have found favor in your sight, O king," she said, "and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my request, and the lives of my people. This is my petition." The king froze. Confusion flashed across his face. "Your life," he repeated. "Your people who would dare threaten you." Esther's voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. "For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I would have remained silent. But this evil cannot be ignored." Xerxes' anger surged. "Who is he? Where is this man who would dare to do such a thing?" Esther turned and pointed across the table. "The adversary and enemy is this wicked man, Haman." Silence struck the room. Haman's breath caught, the color drained from his face. Xerxes' eyes blazed with fury as he rose abruptly from the table and stormed into the garden, too enraged to speak. Haman, trembling, fell to his knees before Esther, begging for mercy. He stumbled toward her couch, grasping at her hands, pleading for his life. At that exact moment, the king returned. The sight before him, Haman falling on Esther's couch, sealed his fate. "Will he even assault the queen while I am in the house?" Xerxes roared. Guards rushed in. Haman was seized instantly. One of the king's servants spoke up. "A gallows 75 feet high stands in Haman's house, the one he built for Mordecai." Xerxes' voice was cold. "Hang him on it." And so they did. Haman was hanged on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. The symbol of his pride became the scene of his downfall. In a single night, the most powerful man in Persia next to the king was gone. Justice had moved swiftly, and the proud had fallen. The next morning, Xerxes gave Haman's entire estate to Queen Esther. She, in turn, appointed Mordecai to oversee it. The king also took off his signet ring, the same one that had once sealed the death sentence of her people, and placed it on Mordecai's hand, giving him royal authority. But even with Haman gone, the danger wasn't over. His decree, once sealed with the king's ring, could not be revoked. Not even by Xerxes himself. The date of destruction, the 13th day of the 12th month, still stood written in law. The enemy's command lingered like a dark shadow over the Jews. So Esther went once more before the king, uninvited, risking her life again. Her heart was steady, her mission clear. "How can I bear to see disaster fall upon my people?" she pleaded. "How can I watch the destruction of my family moved by her courage and devotion?" Xerxes granted permission for a new decree, one that would counter the first. Mordecai was summoned to write it in the king's name and seal it with the royal ring. Messengers were sent out with new orders to every province, in every language, to every people. The decree declared that the Jews in every city had the right to assemble and defend themselves, to destroy anyone who attacked them, and to take the goods of their enemies if necessary. As the new decree spread across the empire, the mood of despair transformed into hope. In homes where there had been mourning laughter began to return. The people who had prepared for death now prepared to stand together. When the appointed day finally arrived, the 13th day of the 12th month, the Jews did not run or hide. Across all 127 provinces, they stood united. Their enemies came against them, but the tables had turned. The fear of the Jews fell upon the people, and royal officials supported them, for they now knew Mordecai's favor with the king. In Susa, the Jews fought bravely and defeated 800 attackers. Among them were Haman's 10 sons, men who had inherited their father's hatred and arrogance. They were captured and later hanged at Esther's request, ensuring the poison of vengeance would die with them. Esther also asked the king for one more day of defense in Susa, and he granted it. Across the empire, 75,000 enemies were defeated that day, but the Jews took no plunder. Their victory was not for greed or revenge, it was for survival, for justice. And when the fighting ceased, peace settled over the land. What had been written as a day of doom became a day of deliverance. The people rested, they rejoiced. Mourning turned into celebration. To remember that reversal, the Jews established a yearly festival Purim named after the lots Haman had cast to determine the day of their destruction. Now, it would forever mark the day God reversed their fate. Every year, on the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, they would feast, rejoice, send gifts to one another, and give generously to the poor. What had once been a day of death became a day of love. Mordecai was honored throughout the empire, clothed in royal blue and white, second only to King Xerxes. But it wasn't his power that made him great, it was his heart. He sought the good of his people and spoke peace to all. And though the name of God was never written in the entire book of Esther, his fingerprints were everywhere, in every twist, every coincidence, every risk, and every rescue. What had been planned for destruction became a story of redemption. The story of Esther reminds us that even when God seems silent, He is never absent. Even when the odds are against us, He is already at work behind the scenes. Perhaps you too are where you are for such a time as this, not by accident, not unseen, but chosen, positioned, and called. Because the same God who reversed the fate of a nation still writes stories of redemption today. And yours could be next. The story doesn't end with victory alone. Esther's courage didn't just save her people from destruction, it changed the very heart of an empire. What began with a decree of death ended with a law of life. And through it all, an orphan girl who once lived in obscurity became a symbol of courage, wisdom, and faith that would echo through generations. When peace finally settled over Persia, the Jews across 127 provinces began to rebuild what fear had broken. Their lives had been spared. Their faith renewed their enemies' silence. Families that once trembled in hiding now sang songs of deliverance in the streets. In the royal city of Susa, joy replaced mourning. The same streets that had once carried messages of despair now rang with laughter prayer, and the scent of fresh feasts. The empire itself began to whisper the name Esther, the queen who dared to stand before the king and change the destiny of her people. Mordecai, once a quiet man at the gate, was now the second most powerful figure in the kingdom. Draped in blue and white robes, wearing a golden crown, he rode through Susa, not in pride, but in humility. The people cheered as he passed, not for his status, but for his heart. He had sought the welfare of his people, and he had spoken peace to all. In him, they saw what true leadership meant. A man who used his influence not to rule, but to protect. Across every province, messengers carried news of the great reversal. Scrolls were read aloud in marketplaces, synagogues, and palaces alike. The words that once brought terror now brought life. The Jews triumphed over their enemies. The God of Israel has turned mourning into joy, and wherever those words were spoken, people bowed their heads in awe. For even though the name of God was never written in the royal records, his presence was undeniable. Every year after that, the people of Israel remembered what had happened. They gathered for 2 days in the month of Adar, the 14th and 15th days, to celebrate the feast they called Purim. It was a name that once symbolized death because it came from the word pur, meaning lot, the very game of chance Haman had used to choose the day of their destruction. But now it symbolized divine irony, because what had been chosen for their doom became their deliverance. During Purim, homes were filled with laughter and color. Families exchanged gifts and food. The poor were cared for. Children ran through the streets, reenacting the story of Esther, shouting and cheering whenever Haman's name was spoken, drowning it out with noise and mockery so that his name would never again be honored. The story was told again and again of a queen who risked everything, a cousin who stood firm in faith, and a God who never abandoned his people, even in silence. As generations passed, the tale of Esther became more than a memory. It became a mirror for every person who would one day face fear, injustice, or silence. It reminded them that courage doesn't always roar sometimes. It whispers through trembling lips that still choose to speak. It reminded them that faith isn't the absence of fear, but the strength to act despite it. And it reminded them that destiny isn't reserved for the mighty. It often finds those who least expect it. Esther's story is the story of unseen hands at work, of divine timing, of purpose hidden in the ordinary. A young woman torn from her home, placed in the palace of her enemies, and asked to risk everything for a people who didn't even know her name. Yet in the grand design of history, her obedience became the hinge on which the fate of a nation turned. It's easy to forget that Esther could have said no. She could have stayed silent, safe behind palace walls. She could have convinced herself that her position was enough, that someone else would act, that someone else would speak, but she didn't. She stepped into the fire of risk, trusting that her life was part of something bigger, and that one choice changed everything. The echoes of her courage can still be heard today in every person who chooses conviction over comfort, in every voice that rises when silence seems safer, in every heart that believes that light can still break through darkness. Her story stands as a reminder that no moment of faith, no act of courage, no quiet decision to do what is right ever goes unseen. Even when heaven seems silent, God is not still. His work often hides behind coincidence, timing, and the small decisions that feel too fragile to matter. But just as he moved through Esther through beauty, fear, fasting, and courage, he still moves through ordinary lives to shape extraordinary outcomes. Perhaps that's the question this story leaves behind. What if you too are where you are for such a time as this? What if your current position, no matter how small or hidden, is the very place where something sacred is meant to begin? Maybe your voice is meant to break the silence. Maybe your courage is meant to inspire someone else's faith. Maybe your moment right now, right here, carries the weight of a greater purpose you can't yet see. Esther's life teaches us that no one is too small for God to use, that the right person in the right place with the right heart can shift the course of history. She began as an exile, became a queen, and ended as a deliverer. Her crown wasn't just gold, it was faith, courage, and the strength to act when everything was at stake. So when fear whispers that you are powerless, remember her. When the world feels too heavy and your voice too quiet, remember the girl who stood before a throne and changed an empire. And when silence feels like abandonment, remember that even when God seems hidden, He is still weaving redemption behind the curtain. Because the story of Esther is not just an ancient tale, it's a timeless reminder. A whisper from history that says, you are seen, you are placed, and you are called. The God who reversed the fate of a nation still writes stories of redemption. And maybe, just maybe, the next one He's writing is yours.